What is up, guys? Alex Scott here with jamplay.com, and welcome to week 2 of Brave New Worlds, beginning bass for guitar players. Now, if you guys missed last week or just tuning into this course for the first time, basically what we are doing, or what I am doing, is teaching you guys all about this awesome instrument right here, the bass guitar. But I wanted to do a course where I'm kind of teaching you guys through the lens of switching over from being a guitar player at any level, beginner, intermediate, or advanced, and kind of switching into playing bass. Now, there's a lot of reasons that you guys might want to do this. If you are a brand new guitar player and you just kind of want a different take on stringed instruments, you could definitely pick up a bass. If you find yourself, and a lot of guitar players find themselves in situations where you're in a band or you're at a jam session, or your friends are sitting around doing some picking or whatever, and there needs a bass, and nobody, maybe somebody has one, but nobody's playing it. Another great reason why you would pick up the bass. I mean, the two instruments are so closely related in a lot of ways that I think it's a very common desire for guitar players of any level to want to venture over into the low side of things. But yeah, so that's kind of the whole idea behind the course, is trying to take some stuff that you guys are already going to know on the guitar in terms of like bar chords and stuff like that, and translating it over to this guy. So last week, in the first week of the course, we talked a bit about the physical differences between the two instruments, our playing kind of technique differences. If you guys remember the taco or the sandwich for the left hand, keeping that thumb nice and in the middle of the back of your neck is going to be your left hand approach, and then your right hand approach with our walking man, right? And that's kind of how we're going to be plucking the strings with our index and middle fingers. So quick little recap for you, but that's basically what we talked about last week, and then some differences between the pickups and electronics, between the two instruments, all that kind of stuff. So if you guys want to refresh on that or revisit that, go over to the Jamplay website, jamplay.com. All of these courses are archived on there, so you guys can go back, rewatch last week. We had some really great questions and input from you guys as well, which I'm really looking forward to this week again. If you guys have any questions or comments or personal stories or just anything you want to chat about, definitely get it over in the chat box, whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on the streaming site. Doesn't matter. We see everything. We got Captain Chris Cook here, man in the chair with me. So he is going to be getting those questions up on screen, and we can do the good old back and forth. But this week, we are moving along to playing along with our first track. As I mentioned last week, a big thing for me whenever I do courses here for Jamplay, I really love to create play-along songs for us to work with, because it makes it a lot more fun, especially when you're just starting on an instrument or kind of transitioning into a new instrument, and you're still in those kind of beginning stages where you might not be able to do as much as you'd like to be able to do. It always helps to have a cool kind of a song or something to be able to play along with. So I have a track for you guys today that's going to move us through some really basic fretting motions, just kind of moving through a couple of different keys. And it has drums and keys and a bunch of cool stuff in it, and it's all real drums, real instruments. I played everything on it, so it should hopefully feel like you guys are jamming along with a real band. So it'll hopefully make your practice sessions a little bit more fun and engaging. But talking about kind of what we're going to be learning this time around, we're kind of taking the few little practice routines, practice exercises that I had given you guys last week in terms of like plucking the open strings with your index finger and then with your middle finger, all that kind of stuff. We're going to be taking something similar to that and then incorporating our left hand to do a couple of really simple fretting patterns to move around in between a couple of different chords. But first, before I get into looking at the actual tune, I just wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about how we're going to be approaching the kind of note element or the chord element of going from guitar to the bass. And a lot of it is going to be kind of hopefully enlightening you guys. And again, there might be some more advanced players among you guys who are really comfortable on guitar and really know a lot. and you're transitioning to the bass, so you're going to have a bit of a leg up in terms of transitioning from chords to scales and stuff like that, which is really going to be the focus. So if we think just in general about, say an E major shape bar chord, right, which I can kind of demonstrate like this, right, where we're barring across here, and then we've got, that's what it sounds like on a bass, and then obviously your bar would be carrying across your B and E strings, your high strings on the guitar, to make that a full chord. So obviously that's what we call an E shape chord, right? If we're thinking about the kind of caged system of chords. But we're going to be transitioning from thinking about things in shapes to thinking about things in root notes and scales, okay? So obviously we all should know that on our E string, whether we're on bass or guitar, our 5th fret on the E string is going to be an A note, right? And so if we are playing that kind of major E-shaped bar chord, that's going to be an A major chord. Even though we say it's an E shape, it's an A major chord, right? And why is it an A major? Well, because our root note is right there and it's an A. So as we move through this course, I'm not going to get too deep into it right now because that's actually what the next 3 weeks are going to be, is looking at major, minor, and dominant chords and translating those shapes on a guitar into scales and patterns on the bass. Since we don't usually play many chords on the bass, that's a pretty obvious difference between the two. Bass, we're focused on the single notes, as opposed to guitar, you're focused on the full chord voicings. But that's kind of the idea, is we're going to be looking at a lot of stuff where it's like, okay, we're going to take that sort of major bar chord shape and look at it in terms of, well, we have an A and an E and an A and then a C sharp, right? Breaking it down to those individual notes, and you'll quickly realize you take that C sharp, you put it an octave down, and now you're left, when you play each note individually, with an A major triad. Same thing for minor bar chords, turning those in, and then A-shaped bar chords, D-shaped bar chords are mainly the ones that we're going to be working with. And focusing mainly on bar chords and those shapes, because another important difference between bass and guitar that we didn't talk a whole lot about last week is the fact that on the bass, it's much more seldom that we use open strings. That's what the exercise today is going to get into, it is a big difference, because obviously open chords are very, very easy to play, and we use them a lot on guitar to do different kind of open string picking patterns, and of course our open chords, which all sound terrible on bass because it's an octave lower, but you get the point. G chord, an E chord, A chord, all that stuff. We're using a lot of open strings on the guitar. We don't use open strings as much on the bass for a couple of different reasons. Namely, once you guys get into really playing bass, you'll realize that from a technique perspective, it's easier to play everything closed. And that's also, because of this kind of hand position in the left hand that we talked about last week, it's much more conducive to that kind of stuff, as opposed to, when you're playing guitar and you have this kind of a thing. You can come around and fret with your thumb, but you can also help to mute strings, like if you're playing a D chord, right? And then you'd have your 2 other frets, or 2 other strings up there. I'm reaching over the top with my thumb to mute all of that, and that's a very, very common technique. On the bass, because we're more focused on single notes and kind of picking or plucking individual notes and individual strings, as opposed to those chords, playing everything in closed positions, playing everything fretted, is a little bit more conducive to the style. Now, another reason is that the tone on a guitar of open strings is really pleasant. It's really pleasing. And especially when you're playing those big chords, or you're doing that kind of stuff on a guitar, it sounds really nice with those open strings. On a bass, it's not that the open strings sound bad, it's just that you guys might be able to hear a little bit of it over the stream here, but especially if you're playing a bass in person, you'll notice that the overall timbre, like if we're playing a 5th fret G on our D string, okay, so 5th fret D string, is going to be a G, and then you play your open G string next to that. There's a very big difference in the tone between those two. That's a little more kind of rolled off on the top end. On the treble frequencies, it's a little bit more kind of muted, a little bit warmer. It has a little bit more punch to it, as opposed to that, which has this kind of almost like nasally quality, and it's a lot brighter. And so when you play everything closed, it's a much more consistent sound. And again, because with the bass, we're going for that kind of foundational, fundamental approach, being that glue, again, like we talked about last week, in between the drums and the rest of the band, where we're supporting the chords that are going on with the notes that we're playing, and then we're supporting the rhythm that's going on with the rhythms that we're playing, all that kind of stuff. You want to have a very consistent tone, note to note, even within the course of a bass line. It's the difference between going... Hear how that G, when I play that open string, and I'm not even like plucking it harder or anything, it's just naturally, the open strings on a bass have a very, very different timbre. Part of that comes from the fact that most basses use plastic or bone nuts. This part right here, where the strings kind of sit between the tuning machines and where they go over the fretboard. So here you have basically a piece of plastic that's supporting the string, and then when we fret, now we've got metal, the metal of the frets, right, obviously. So that's a big part of the difference in tone between those two things. So when I'm playing a bass line like that, now suddenly I have a couple of things happening. I'm having to worry about muting that open string separately, right? If I'm fretting something, I just lift up, and it kills the note. If I'm playing an open string, I have to manually dedicate a whole finger to touching that string, or several fingers, or my whole hand or whatever, to touching that string and muting it. When I'm playing it all closed, I'm not having to mute really anything. The strings are naturally muting themselves as I lift up. Whereas if we're playing, see how I have to shift my whole hand? Or even if I were doing, both open D strings and open G strings, I have to really follow it around and be muting all this stuff constantly, because and it's not like guitar. We're not playing chords. We don't want all those notes to be ringing out all the time, because it's going to get muddy, it's going to get cloudy, and when you're, playing those low fundamental notes, that stuff, it conflicts with itself really, really quickly and really muds up the sound of everything. So we want nice, even, clean, individually kind of distinguishable notes. And it's much more difficult to get that when we're using our open strings, okay? So that's kind of the reason why, as we go through this course, we have a little bit of open string stuff going on today with some sort of hammer-on kind of stuff. So we will be using open strings, and you use them occasionally for sure. But as a general rule of thumb, you guys are not going to be able to rely on your open strings nearly as much as you can on guitar now that you've moved over to playing the bass. It's going to be a little bit of a different approach, and I will warn you guys ahead of time, your left hands are going to get very tired, because now not only are the strings bigger and thicker and heavier gauge, and there's more tension on them from a kind of physics standpoint, you're also going to be fretting a lot more than you might be used to, as opposed to just worrying about a few frets here and there and then playing a full chord, a big open chord. We're going to be worrying about fretting pretty much every single note all the time. So your left hands are definitely going to get a little bit tuckered out from doing this. With all those factors at play, it just takes a little bit more energy. So as we're practicing and as we're moving through this course together, keep that in mind. Always be listening to your body. You know, that's very, very important. And if your left hand is screaming and saying, dude, stop, I can't, this is too much, it's too much fretting, you know, stop, take a break. You know, we can stretch our hands out a little bit by bending the thumb back just like that, massaging that kind of meat in between the thumb and the rest of your fingers, stretching your fingers out individually, bending them back, all this kind of stuff. And really just focusing on keeping your hands, left hand in particular, nice and as relaxed as it can be, okay? Because it will get tiring to do all of this fretting. Now that brings me to another point that a lot of people, especially guitar players who are moving to bass or beginning bass players, ask if they know a little bit about music is capos. When do we use a capo on a bass? And the answer to that is really never. I have never personally seen or really used, or seen another bass player use, or used myself, a capo. And for that exact same reason, like when we're capoing on a guitar, we're doing it so that we can, put a capo here, and now our guitar is in more or less in the key of A, right? So we can play an E shape open chord, but it's an A chord. And so we can do all of our familiar open chords, and we can say, oh, well, now it's A flat. And I can still do all of my kind of, you go through the same motions and make all the same chord shapes, but it moves it into different keys. It's not quite the approach that we're taking with the bass, which is, again, our fingers are the capos now. Because if you're in the key of A flat, you're going to be centered around that 4th fret on your E string, right? Okay, and so that A flat right there, or 6th fret D string is another A flat. So instead of trying to capo up and think about stuff like that and then use open strings, we're simply just going to be fretting those notes because we are focused on those individual notes as opposed to open stuff. So yeah, just a couple of notes and a couple kind of disclosures, I guess, for you guys. And more things, because it's stuff that you don't necessarily think about moving from guitar to bass, because you look at the tube and you go, okay, well, the tuning is really similar. Obviously, the bass is an octave lower, but it's still E, A, D, G, and I know these scale patterns, and those will translate and stuff like that, but there are just these subtle little differences, less in technique and more even in just like mindset and how you're thinking about the whole thing, that are going to differ between the two instruments. So, looks like we might have somebody jumping in with a question.
Yeah, we got a quick question from iNode or eNode.
Indeed.
The open E on the bass, which octave is that on the piano? Would it be used open E for playing the boogie or a fretted E? Key of E, obviously.
Right, definitely. Well, and so I was actually just going to say that. I know that's a great observation and a great question. The open E string, obviously you can't fret that note. So that is one that we do use a lot. So that's kind of the exception to the rule. But I'm more speaking of in terms of all of your other strings, your A string, D string, G string, are going to be typically fretted. In terms of which octave that E is on a piano, I want to say it's 2, let me think about this. I think it's 3 octaves below middle C. Either 2 or 3, I think. Don't quote me on that. I'm not great with my ranges on a piano in that way. I play a little bit of piano, and you'll hear me playing keyboards on this track. But yeah, I mean, in a lot of situations, yeah, you would absolutely use your open E. Or I really like the tone of fretting really, really high on the bass. So you've got an E here, your 2nd fret D string, right? And then you've got another E here, 7th fret A string. But I really like this E, 12th fret E string. So playing a boogie with that kind of a boogie-woogie kind of a thing, you could totally do that up here on your 12th fret. But then, yeah, you would also definitely use playing a lot with that open E, because obviously there's no way to fret that note because there's no string below it to fret it. So that is definitely our exception to the rule. But I'd Google that one if you're really curious about what octave that is on a piano. If you go search that real quick, I'd be really curious to know for my own future reference. I think it's like if you take middle C and go 3 octaves down from that and then a third up from that up to the next E above that, I think that's where it sits, but I'm not 1,000% sure.
Well, Sandy and The live stream says 2 below.
2 octaves below? Yeah, it's somewhere in there, 2 or 3 octaves below. But check it out for further learning. But great question, great observation. And yeah, you will be using that open E. But as a general rule of thumb, besides that one specific note, we're going to be fretting pretty much everything. So let's go ahead and take a look at our track for today, our tab for today. Now you guys are going to see it's very, very easy. It's very straightforward. We're just kind of moving in between 4 different chords. We've got an A chord, a D chord, a G chord, and a C chord, okay? But how we're approaching this is really to just get our left hand and our right hand, left hand and our right hand working together, okay? So we're going to be starting off fretting, our 5th fret on our E string, which is an A, right? So that's our first note, and we're going to be holding that for 2 beats. If you guys aren't familiar with standard notation like what we have on the screen, the dot with a hole in it, or the kind of circle with a stem going up, is going to be a half note, so we hold that for 2 counts. The solid dots with the stems are going to be quarter notes, which we hold for 1 count, and then just a circle with no stem that you see in the second bar, that's a whole note, and we're going to be holding that for 4 counts. And obviously it's in 4/4 time, so we have 4 beats in each measure or bar. So to just kind of play through the first 2 bars of this, we're going to, again, 5th fret, E string, A, we're going to hold that for 2 counts. Then we're going to play our open E string, fret the 3rd fret, which is a G, and then back up to that A, and then hold that A for 4 counts. So it's going to sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? And we're just going to take that pattern and move it across each string. Now, the way I've set up this exercise is I want you guys to really experiment with this. For me, the most comfortable thing to do is in our left hand, I'm using my pinky finger to fret that 5th string, or to fret at that 5th fret, right? And then I'm using my index finger to fret that 3rd fret. And that's the same for every string. Okay. Now, for some people, it's more comfortable to use index and ring finger, or maybe middle finger and pinky. Or, you can even do 1 finger and slide. Okay. I want you guys to experiment with as many different left hand kind of iterations of this as you can. So again, first couple bars, we've got that A, E, G, A, 2, 3, 4. Now we're just going to move that 1 whole string over. Now we're on our A string, 5th fret, which is a D note. And this is, if you think of your A shape bar chord, right? And then you've got your 2 strings above that I'm not fretting here. That actually is a D major chord, even though it's an A shape chord. When you play it at the 5th fret on that A string, it's going to be a D chord. So we're now D, then we're going to play our open A, 3rd fret on the A string, which is a C, and then our fretted D then, okay, our plain D. We'll remove that again over 1 more string. Now we're on our D string, 5th fret D string, which is a G. And so now you guys can think of it in terms of if you were to bar a D major shape chord, right? Which again, missing strings, but like that, and then you're muting these 2 strings down here. But when you're on your D string and you're fretting it at the 5th fret, that makes it a G. It'd be a G chord then. But we're just taking the root notes. So now this is a G. G, open D, 3rd fret D string, F, and then G. Okay? Now for our last string, our G string, it's going to be a C. And we're just going to fret there, 5th fret, open, 3rd fret, 5th fret again. So you guys can see we're just taking the same pattern, move it over a string, move it over a string, and over a string. And you'll hear when I play along with the actual track here in a second that the instruments are following all of those chords. So they're kind of going to be playing around what you're playing. Now, this isn't a chord progression you would necessarily see in a normal song, but it's less designed to be, something really musical that you would want to play, and it's more designed to just get all of these fingers and hands and stuff all working together towards a common goal, okay? So there's another half to this challenge, but I want to play through this first. And I'm just going to be using just the index finger on my right hand to pluck everything. We're not going to be worrying about our middle finger yet, okay? So it's all going to be plucked with just that index finger. And you guys can kind of watch my right hand and see what I'm doing in terms of my right hand technique as well. So I'm going to play through it once. You guys can either watch or follow along at home. And then I want to give you guys one more dimension to this challenge. And then we'll probably play through it again, and then we can go ahead and start grabbing some questions. And just as a reminder, we're still working on this stuff, and if you guys have questions about this tab in particular, obviously we can talk about that, but any questions or comments in general, conversations, anecdotes, anything like that that you guys want to chime in with, get them over in that chat window. We will get them up on screen and talk about it a little bit. But until that time, give me 1 second here and get this file pulled up. We're going to go ahead and play this. Again, open strings, index finger on the right hand. 2, 3, 4. D string, A string. Up to the D string for the G chord. And all the way back down. So those dots and lines on the notation mean is that we're repeating this whole exercise over and over. And again, 2 more times all the way through. Last time through, D, 5th fret A string, up to the G chord, and our C again. And then end on that A note. So there you go. That is our exercise. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do with this. You guys will notice that I kind of specified that I'd be using the index finger on my right hand, right? Well, obviously we can change that up. So we can use just our index. We can also use just our middle. We can alternate, starting with either one and alternating in any direction we want. Right? So using both of the fingers. The other kind of dimension to this challenge, which I'm going to do in a second here so you guys can see and do it along with the track again, is fretting even more. So we're kind of using our open strings, right? On the first one, we have to, because that open E that's the only way you can get that note on this instrument. So we play that one normally. But then when we move up to that D chord, our 5th fret A string, once you guys are comfortable with playing the open A and then the 3rd fret and then the 5th fret, I want you guys to kind of bridge down, bar down with your pinky, and you get 5th fret. Obviously, those are the same notes. That's also an A. See how I'm now playing the whole shape totally closed and totally fretted? Where we're going 5th fret A string, 5th fret E string, 3rd fret A string, 5th fret A string, okay? It's the same shape as doing it with the open string, but we're playing it all closed. This is kind of the second part of that challenge. So what you guys can do in your practice routine is, start with just one finger on the right hand, so call it your index finger, and play it as written with the open strings. Once you're comfortable with that, go on to using the middle finger. Once you're comfortable with that, you can start alternating. still using all those open strings. And then the final frontier is going to be playing all those in a closed position. So the first one will have that open E, playing it as written, and then we move up to that D, fretting that second note kind of in the phrase. And we move that same pattern over. So now for the G chord, we're on the 5th fret D string. We're going to go down 5th fret A string to get that second note, and instead of playing our open D, we're going to play a fretted D. And then move it over one string again. So let's go ahead and run that one time here. I'll be alternating this time with my right hand a little bit here and there. And then I will be playing everything closed and everything fretted, so you guys can kind of see and hear the difference. 1, 2, 3. Doing this, we want to make sure that everything is relaxed, right? That nothing's tensing up, nothing's uncomfortable. If it is, by all means, stop, take a break, let your hands get acquainted with the instrument. There's no harm in taking a break if you need to. So there you go. There is taking the exact same exercise, but just kind of spicing it up a little bit to get you guys' hands familiar with some of these techniques. And there is a ton of crossover between guitar and bass, particularly in terms of, obviously they're tuned the same. It's just an octave lower. So if you guys already know some fretting or scale patterns on the guitar, those are going to translate fine. But it's more just in getting used to things like not working with open strings, not having to worry about muting as much as you do on the guitar. When you're playing, chords on the guitar that involve maybe only 4 of your 6 strings, whether they're in the middle or on the top or whatever, you always have to be worried about kind of finding a way to mute those lower ones. On the bass, we kind of flip the script and take an opposite approach where everything should be muted all the time, except for the one note that we're playing. So even if I'm, down here and I'm just playing this one G, you guys will see that my pinky and, ring finger or whatever, the rest of my hand is kind of resting on the other strings. It's kind of an inverted way of thinking about it, as opposed to guitar where you're worrying about muting specific things. Now here we're worried about muting everything, except for the one note that we want to actually sound, which happens on guitar when you're playing lead, of course. But in terms of, I'm kind of approaching this in terms of working from chords and applying those chords over to the bass. So that is our track for this week. Again, real drums, real keyboards, which should hopefully be cool for you guys, so you guys can kind of lock in and groove along with a little bit, and again, make that practice routine not so difficult. So yeah, do we have anybody jumping in with questions and stuff?
Yeah, we have a long one from Maria Luisa.
Excellent.
The E string is clearly an octave below the low E on a guitar. Yet I've heard that people are buying 8 and 9 string guitars so they don't need a bass. If the 7th string is the B below E, then how could they do that? Even with 9 strings, they don't have the E and A on the bass, so they can't get that low.
That's a very good observation, Maria. And it's the whole 8 and 9 string guitar thing. There's a couple of different guys out there doing it. In the kind of jazz and funk world, there's Charlie Hunter, who I'm sure a lot of you will know, who is a wonderful player, and he kind of will, he has, I believe, an 8 string that is tuned down low. And so he'll kind of play bass lines low, and then he can comp chords, little chord shapes above. which is neat. And then a lot of the guys, and I'm assuming probably who you're referring to, are guys who are more in the hard rock and metal world. That's a very, very popular thing among them. But that really gets into the tuning of everything, because you could take a normal 6-string guitar, and if you added 2 additional low strings, you could make them a B and an E. So then your tune, and then that would be right down to the low E string on a bass, and then the B would be here, and then that is the pitch of a normal low E string on a guitar. So your tuning would then from low to high go E, B, E, A, D, G, B, E. Okay, so that's one example of how they could do that. You could also it would be a little odd to go E, A, E, and then through your normal tuning on your guitar. But there are a lot of different tuning options for those guys. The bass is normally tuned in fourths, which the guitar is up until you get to that B string, where you've got E to A is a fourth, A to D is a fourth, D to G is a fourth, and then G to B is a third. So that's where the guitar kind of breaks the tuning as opposed to a bass. If you've got a 6-string bass, it's tuned the same way, B, E, A, D, G, and then the highest note is actually a C instead of a B like it is on a guitar. So basically, when you're talking about 8 strings, 9 strings, all that kind of stuff, it's a lot in how they tune their instruments. But there will never be any replacement. They can say, oh yeah, I'm going to get this so that I don't need a bass player. But then what ends up usually happening, unless you're a monster player like Charlie Hunter, where he can do bass lines and chords all at the same time, and he's kind of a freak of nature for that reason. You just end up in a situation where it's like, okay, now you have a 9-string bass, and you're playing bass lines, and you have all these extra strings that you're never really going to do anything with. So I don't want to say what's the point, because everybody has their own tastes, and if you can do something cool with it, by all means do it. But it's always been a funny argument to me when they're like, well, yeah, I'm going to get this huge instrument so that I don't need a bass player. Well, you're just becoming the bass player at that point if you're worrying about playing the bass lines down there. And again, unless you're an insane musician, that's what you're going to be doing with your time. You're not going to be able to be up here soloing and playing rhythm guitar and playing the bass lines all at the same time. It's just not possible unless you're somebody like Charlie Hunter and you've practiced that for decades, and that's your thing. But you're correct in all of your observations. That is an octave below the E. Yeah, but that's basically what I would have to be my kind of input on it. Is you can do that, but to me it very quickly becomes a thing of like what are you trying to accomplish? You know what I mean? Like what's the purpose there? Why would you add those? Because then you just end up playing bass. Just get a bass player, or you play bass and then you get a different guitar player, because they fit. It gets into what I was talking about last week. Being really aware of our role in the band as well. A guitar player is not supposed to be a bass player for a very good reason. The two instruments have different jobs. The guitar is meant to play chords and melodies, and the bass is meant to be that kind of foundation of everything and playing that those root notes and stuff. So it's if you can have your feet in both worlds and you have this crazy instrument, that's cool. But it's definitely a lot harder and is not going to sound quite as convincing, and you're not going to be able to do as much with it if you are, worried about the bass and then trying to do the rhythm on top of that. And then you have to stop doing the bass and then you're playing lead. So now the whole band is missing a bass note. Like it just gets sticky. So, but definitely some great input. Thank you.
See, we got another question from Sandy. Actually, it's a double question.
Okay.
In all your examples today, I think you stayed on the 1, 3, and 5 notes of the chord. Are there times where other notes of the scale can be used? And are there notes you would normally avoid using?
Absolutely. Good observation, Sandy. Those are actually not the 1, the 3, and the 5. It is the 1, the root, which, we're going from A to D to G to C. If we want to get technical and into intervals, I was playing 1, 5, then the flat 7th interval, and then the root. If you're playing the root, the 5th below it, E is the 5th of A, and then G is the flatted 7th interval of A, which you would find in a minor chord or a dominant chord. The exercise today, I don't want you guys to worry about any of those notes in relation to the chord, because it's not, from like a musical perspective, this exercise is not meant to be like, oh, this is a song and this is like a bass line that you would play somewhere, because it really quite isn't. It's more just, again, I'm trying to kind of start everybody on the same page. So keeping in mind that we probably have some beginners with us, I wanted to just create a very, very simple fretting exercises that's going to use a couple of different fingers in a couple of different spots on all the different strings. So don't worry too much about what notes those are within the context of the scale yet, because next week we're going to be talking about major scales, and I'm going to be going over all that stuff, the 1, the 3, the 5 triads, how that relates to bar chords on the guitar. The week after that's going to be minor. The week after that's going to be dominant. So we're going to go all over all that stuff, and intervals and scales and everything, which sounds scary if you guys have not done much music theory, but I promise I'm going to make it very easy and painless, or at least do my best to, because I know theory stuff can be a little bit intimidating sometimes. But yeah, so that's going to be the next 3 weeks, and then after that, the sort of the final 4 weeks of this course, or 5 weeks, I guess, are going to be all about different genres. So I'm going to be teaching you guys using the stuff that we're learning now, and we're going to learn over the next couple of weeks. At the end of the course, sort of second half, is going to be looking at all these different genres and talking about what you would typically play on bass over a rock song versus a country song versus a funk song, all that kind of stuff. Good observations. Those weren't quite the 1, the 3, and the 5. The triad is a little bit different than those notes. But just don't stress too much about that. Right now, we're going to get into all that stuff in the coming weeks. So appreciate your enthusiasm, though, and great thinking. You're thinking the right way about it for sure, in terms of like being aware that each individual note has its own place in the scale. We're going to go all over all of that stuff. So hope you stick with us. But thanks for chiming in, Sandy. Really appreciate it. We got anybody else jumping in? Okay, cool. Looks like not for right now. So what I can go ahead and do real quick is I'll play along with the track one more time. If you guys have any last questions or comments or thoughts or ideas or anything that you guys want to get in, stick those up in the chat box right now. I'm going to play along one more time. You guys can feel free to play along with me at home, or just watch and save you practicing for later. Either way is fine. And then once I get through this, if we have a couple of questions to do, we'll tackle those. And then if not, we should be able to wrap it up for today. So let's play along with that tab just one more time here. 2, 3. I'm going to play it as written this time, but using only the middle finger on my right hand. Now the other thing that we want to be focusing on here is making sure all of our notes are nice and clean. We don't want any buzzing or any weirdness. We just want nice, clean, pure notes, pure tone. Cool, so there you go. Again, a slightly different approach using mostly the middle finger on the right hand that time. And I even did make a little mistake in there. And hey, even us pros can mess up the simplest stuff sometimes. Happens to all of us. So again, guys, while we're doing this, we want to be focusing on really clean notes, making sure everything is ringing out and sustaining as much as we want it to, focusing on consistency of volume from note to note. And if you guys are brand new to the bass, I can almost guarantee you that it's not going to be perfect right off the bat. You might have a little bit of buzz here and there, and that's totally okay. Don't beat yourself up over it. It's a new instrument for you guys, and it's going to take some getting used to. So just be paying attention to that. Focus to or strive for those clean notes as much as you can. If you're not getting them, try to take a look at why. Are you not pushing down hard enough? That's probably the number one thing. Or if you're not quite fretting in the right place, you always want to be fretting up as close to the fret itself that's making the note. So like on our 5th fret, if we look at our neck, obviously the fret, that the actual 5th fret itself is this one right here in relation to the dot. Dot is here. The actual fret that's doing the work is there. So we want our finger to be closer to that fret than not, so that we're almost pushing the string directly down onto it. So if you are getting some buzzing, if your finger's over here, kind of towards the back end of the fret, that doesn't sound nearly as good, right? So we want to shift that. That's a nice clean note. So you can look at that. Pressure as well. If you're not quite pressing down hard enough, that'll give you buzz as well. So there are 2 things right there to take into account. Another really common thing that beginning bass players do is plucking a little bit too hard, which can sound like that. So you want to make sure that your right hand is not working too hard, and you're just playing with a nice, even, consistent approach with your right hand. So a couple pointers there if you're having some trouble. And again, always be listening to your body on this stuff. If your hand is yelling at you and going, "Hey man, you can cut it out for a second, I'm tired," let it be tired. Take it off, wring it out a little bit, stretch it out a little bit, like I was saying earlier. Either hand, if your right hand starts to cramp a little bit. But just mainly focusing on making sure that both of your hands are as relaxed as they can be. And that's what's really going to get you the cleanest technique, is using just as much energy as you need to get those notes to sound out nice and clean. Do we have any other questions? Looks like indeed we do.
Yeah, we have one from Randy. Are frets just for knowing where the note is?
Excellent question, Randy. No, they are. I mean, they're not for knowing where the note is. They determine where the note is. So if you think about the instrument, unless you're playing a fretless bass, that is where this doesn't apply. In that case, if there's lines on a fretless bass, which there sometimes are, those are just to indicate to you right where the note is, which is very handy. If you have a fretless bass that is lined, they're called lined fretlesses. Fancy that. But on a fretted bass, the frets are actually the ones doing the work. So when we push down, right, just like I was just saying, I can kind of play anywhere in there. And in this case, I'm playing the 7th fret on my G string, which is going to be a D, is the note that's going to make. So kind of no matter where I am in there, that pitch isn't changing, right? I mean, if you get too low, then it unfrets. Or if you do a slide, you can hear how it's discrete notes. It's all the individual notes. And so what's happening is that each fret is becoming a new nut. Now our nut up here, right, I was talking a little bit about earlier, is a little piece of plastic, and that's where your strings all sit. And you obviously have, the strings will resonate above the nut, but it's a hard stop, right? There's no vibrations are going to cross that point because it's grabbing onto the string. A fret does the same thing, just temporarily. So when we tune, this whole scale and everything is such that makes it G. Well, when I put my finger there, this first fret, that piece of metal, now the string is sitting firmly against that piece of metal, and that is what is changing the pitch. It's shortening the length of the string by a certain amount to create that note. And when I slide up, now it's the next note. So the frets definitely tell you where each note is, but they do that because they're the ones that determine what that pitch is going to be, what that note is going to be. So G, A flat, A, B flat, B, C, D flat, D, E flat, E, F, G flat, etc. All of those notes are determined by the actual placement of those metal frets, and that's what's going to do the work in creating that pitch. So yeah, but excellent question though. Something a lot of people might not necessarily think about in terms of the how the instrument actually works. But yeah, thanks for chiming in with that.
To follow that, Enode says, not sure, or he said, shortening the length of the string is how you achieve different pitches.
Yes, exactly. And that's a much more eloquent way of saying everything that I just said, basically. But it's, yeah, you're shortening the length of the string. So, like, if I fret, again, take that 7th fret G string, I can go up here, and if I quiet this and get into the mic that's picking up my voice here, you can hear, sorry, it's out in front of me, there's actually another note hiding up here. You would never really play that because they're not in tune or anything. But when I do that, I'm creating this, these 2 points here. And this is the one we need to worry about, obviously, the fret itself. But there's technically vibration back here, too. Now I almost have 2 strings that are both much shorter than the original string. So the pitch is going to be higher. And the shorter it gets, here's full length, slightly shorter, etc., etc., etc. And a really interesting fun fact for you guys, at the 12th fret, if you take the distance from our bridge, right down here, up to our nut, say that's 34 inches, right? What's half of 34? 17. 17 inches from either of those 2 points, the 12th fret is the perfect halfway point of the string, because every octave is a double of the frequency is double. So if you say it's 100 hertz for the frequency of a G, which it's not, but just for sake of argument, that would be 200. And then an octave above that would be 400. It doubles every time, right? Because we're cutting our length in half, cutting our string in half. So yes, the shorter you make your string, the shorter you make your vibrating body, the higher pitch that it is going to have. Very astute observation. Anybody else chiming in?
We got a question from Gina. How do you tune the bass?
Sure, excellent, great question, Gina. So in terms of actual pitches, your lowest string is going to be an E. Okay. Next string from that, and I'm going, like, from my perspective, I'm going from the closest to me, which is our lowest pitch string, to the furthest away. Okay, which is going to be our highest pitch string. It's going to be the notes E, A, D, and G. Okay. Now, if you've just bought your bass in a store or in a pawn shop or whatever, it's probably going to be pretty close to in tune already. So my recommendation would be, if you need something to help you do it, you get a tuner, obviously, and that's, sometimes they're pedals, that sit on the floor like a guitar pedal. Like, actually, I have one right here that I can show you guys. I got to unplug it, but here's that muted, Chris, the guitar channel. I just want to show them the tuner pedal. Sorry.
It should be good.
Oh. Never mind the buzz for a moment. This is an example of a tuner pedal that we keep here at Jamplay that everybody uses. So you can turn it on and off by putting your foot on it, obviously, and kind of clicking that button. And there's going to be a little row of lights here that are going to tell you, kind of it's flat, meaning the pitch is too low, or it'll go sharp, the pitch is too high. And you obviously, just with your tuning machines here, can fine tune the note in. So you're going to be going for an E, an A, a D, and a G. And all those are going to be 1 octave, as I was talking about last week, they're 1 octave below where the guitar is. So the pitch of a guitar is up there, same notes, but an octave lower. Okay. And so, like I said, if you bought your bass at a store, it should already be pretty close to in tune, and you'll just want to get one of these, or they make tuners that just clip on to the top that you don't have to plug in or anything. And they actually just sense the vibration of the wood and will tell you what pitch the string is at, and if it's sharp or flat, too high or too low, and you need to fine tune it a little bit more. There's a great company called Snark that makes tuners like that are pretty affordable, $15, $20, $30. Should get you one of those. And this tuner, this tuner pedal, I think, is, I don't know, $80, maybe $100, something like that. A little bit more reliable and obviously a little bigger and more heavy duty than a little clip-on thing, but I use clip-on tuners professionally, so those should do you fine as well. But yeah, in terms of like actually, how to tune and what pitches it are, you've got an E, A, D, G. You're going to use these guys to finely adjust each string. So, great question.
Got another one from Randy. So when you press, you want to do it close to the fret?
Yes, absolutely, Randy. Close to the fret above. And when I say above, like, dimensions are kind of hard when you guys are looking at like a mirror image of me and blah, blah, blah. But basically, closer to the pickup. And say it that way, closer to the bridge. So if I'm fretting at my 5th fret on any string, we'll say 5th fret E string. In the middle is totally fine, which is right there. And no, I'm not not flipping the camera the bird. Sorry. We'll use that finger. That looks a little better. In the middle of the fret is fine. But yeah, generally I tend towards the fret that is closer to the pickup because that's the fret that's actually doing the work, right? So yeah, I'll just stop right there in the middle of a phrase. You can see where my finger is on that fret, right? So it is definitely closer to this fret, which is closer to the pickup. That's the fret that's actually doing the work, as opposed to if I move that finger. Oh, here, this camera's better. Yeah, if I move that finger, so it's right there. That's good and clean. Hear how it starts to buzz out? And I'm pressing as hard as I can, and it's still getting buzz. And the closer we get to that fret, eventually basically right on top of it. Boom, just stopping again. I'm really close to that, the action fret, we'll call it, as opposed to being further away, because that's where you can start to get into some kind of nasty buzzing and stuff. So yeah, as close to the fret as possible. You don't want to be right on top of it because then you can start to mute the string or even end up kind of fretting the note above it or something. But just shy on the side of the fret that's doing the work. Awesome question though, and all great questions from everybody. This is fantastic. We got maybe one last one, or
yeah, we got time for one last one here.
Okay, great.
Let's see. So Gina asks, what is a good beginner bass to learn on?
Great question, Gina. I would recommend. It kind of depends on your budget and what you're trying to do. If you are really serious about the bass being something that you do consistently, obviously I would recommend getting something a little bit nicer. If you are mainly a guitar player and you just kind of want to have a bass to have around, just have it play around a little bit, maybe you use it sometimes, you might not be interested in investing quite as much. In any case, I would never spend more than, say, $300, $300 US dollars on a really good quality starter instruments. You can get really great beginner basses from companies like Squier is one that I definitely recommend. They are a kind of a student brand of Fender, which everybody knows, Fender, obviously. Squier are kind of their beginner instruments, and their basses range from 100 to about 300. And you'd be pretty good with anything in there. The particular model of bass, you could definitely look at one like the one that I'm playing. This is called a precision bass, or P bass for short, and you will know it from its kind of staggered pickup. Okay, so you see how this is one. It is 2 pickups technically, but it's wired as 1 pickup, so you only have 1 volume knob to worry about. You don't have multiple pickups to worry about, but you can always tell a P bass because it'll have 2 knobs and this sort of funny looking split pickup in the middle of it. And like I said, we've got just a volume knob there and then a tone knob, which takes the kind of bright, high treble frequencies down. That's what our tone knob does. It's exactly the same as a tone knob on any guitar, so on a Strat or on a Telecaster or something like that. The tone knob does exactly the same thing, works the same on both instruments. So I would say like the simplest bass is a precision bass or a P bass, and lots of different companies make them. Like I said, Squier is a great company to look at. I believe their basic model precision basses run 100, maybe $150. And you can always go down to your local music store, mom and pop shop or Guitar Center or whatever, and ask them, to see what's in your budget. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't, if you're an absolute beginner and you're not sure how much you're going to be into playing it, or if it's really something that's going to speak to you and consume a lot of your time, I wouldn't spend more than $200 or $300. We'll get you a perfectly serviceable, good student quality instrument that'll be great to learn on and great to play for many years to come. This bass that I'm playing actually has kind of an interesting story about it. It was also very, very inexpensive, and it is actually, if you look at the back of the neck, you can see all this kind of wear and tear on the neck. That's because this bass is actually a 1978 vintage, and it's all original components. But I managed to snag this on Craigslist for $150, which I was very lucky to find any kind of vintage instrument in good condition for that little money, let alone a really amazing sounding P bass. And I gig and have toured the country with this bass many times over, and it's a wonderful instrument. So if you want a little cool kind of tip for any of you guys out there, if you want to get a really cool vintage bass, get a Harmony. Okay, this is a Korean company that made sort of knockoffs of Fender instruments in the 60s and 70s. And one of their most successful models, I don't remember exactly what it says on the back, and H65N is this bass. But just do a search for Harmony P bass clone, and you're in good hands. You're going to get a really cool vintage bass for $100, maybe $200, and they play great. They sound great. Kind of a little insider secret for you guys. I love these things. Sounds great for recording, great for gigging. Really quality everything, because they that old saying, they don't make stuff like they used to. They really don't. Even though this thing was, is kind of an import model, and it's over 40 years old now. All the hardware and stuff on it is nicer than even basses that are twice as much made today. So yeah, Harmonies, check those out as well if you want to get something with a little bit more character to it. But yeah, good beginner bass. Beginner bass. Can't talk. Squire is a really, really good bet. That's where I would recommend you look first.
Do you have time for one more or no?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
All right, we got one last question from Cromwell.
Cool, great.
How do you transition from a major scale to its relative minor?
Fancy question there, Cromwell. The relative minor is going to be the 6 of the scale. So take the key of D, for instance. And we will get into this kind of stuff over the next couple of weeks, specifically week after next, I believe is the week that I have slated for us to talk about minor chords. But actually, we'll do key of C, okay? Because it's easy. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? Is our basic C major scale. The relative minor of C is A. It is the 6th chord. So if we assign numbers or intervals to each one of those notes of the scale, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Relative minor is the 6th note of the scale. And that gets into modes where you play all of the notes from the C major scale, but you start on an A and end on an A. So if our notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C in a C major scale, play those exact same notes, start on an A, end on an A, we get A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And that is the relative minor. So relative minor of C is A. Couple different keys for you. D, relative minor of D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. Down to the 6th is a B. So our B is the relative minor in the key of D. Okay? So D is B minor, C is A minor, key of E would be C sharp minor, key of G would be E minor. Yeah, you're basically going to go up your major scale until you get to that 6th note, and that's going to be, and then you play that as a minor chord. That is your relative minor to your major key. Like I said, we will be getting into all of that stuff over the next couple of weeks. In terms of like transitioning between those two things, you just walk down to it is the easiest way to do it. Okay, so we're in our C. Walk down to A. Or D. You've got our D. Just walk down through that C sharp, in the case of D, through the 7th, really, the 7th of the scale. Like that, right? So that would be how you would transition from a major to its relative minor. But in terms of the relationship between those two chords, it is the 6th scale degree, the 6th interval, or the 6th mode. But I'll get more in depth into all that and make a lot more sense over the coming weeks, though. But that's an awesome question and very, You're getting ahead of us there, Cromwell. Calm down, buddy. No, it's good. But I think we're good then. All right, great. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Those are all awesome questions. I absolutely love you guys getting involved and that we're able to kind of go back and forth, and I can help you guys out with a lot of these questions. Hopefully I am helpful and don't just sit here and rant on and on, but as I have a tendency to do sometimes. But no, I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope this course is a lot of fun for you guys. And as we go through this stuff and we get more songs to play along and practice with and get through more material, it is going to get a lot more fun and a lot more challenging, of course. But yeah, I just really appreciate you guys tuning in. I will be back here next Tuesday at 4 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Eastern. I do my duo course with the wonderful Mr. Dave Brown, who's a great guitar player, and we're talking a lot about different topics in regards to playing with other musicians. Hopefully, that was earlier tonight. We did a lesson of that. So maybe you guys saw that. If you didn't, you can tune in earlier next week and see me and Dave talking about starting a band and writing songs and all kinds of really great stuff in terms of working with other musicians. And then, of course, every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain, 5 p.m. Pacific, I am here doing this course. So this was week 2. We've got 8 weeks to go. Really hope you guys can stick with me through the rest of the course. As always, if you have any questions during the week when I don't happen to be on air, you guys can stick them over on the Jamplay forums. We take a look at those, and we will get to those questions within the next week's lesson. So you can definitely do that. There's also a lot of other bass content that I've created over on Jamplay that you guys can check out if you want some further learning. But yeah, until then, thank you guys so much again for tuning in. My name is Alex Scott here with Jamplay.com, and we will see you guys next week.